Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Gaming here, back with another video. Today's episode, we're taking a look at the Blessed Hammer Paladin in-game build. So this build, instead of just simply sending Blessed Hammers spinning outward, basically this version of the Paladin turns a skill tree into a highly mobile source of damage. With Disciple's Halo, the hammers kind of follow around your character, allowing you to move through enemies while maintaining constant damage around you. So the build is really going to come together with this item here, Argent Veil. So this unique ring allows your movement to trigger additional Blessed Hammer cast. So that means Evade becomes both a movement ability and an important part of your damage. So once Argent Veil is combined with your Arbiter of Justice, your Arbiter Zephyr, and boots that have attacks reduce Evade's cooldown of fixed, the Paladin is going to become very, very fast. Now the question becomes, how do we maintain Arbiter for extended periods? So that's going to come in from Baru of Light's Epiphany. So you can see from the two sets here, Disciple skills reduce the cooldown of Arbiter of Justice by 0.1 seconds when they deal damage, and 0.5 seconds if they have a cooldown. Right, and you can see that is coming from our two set. We also have a couple aspects that you can pair with this to make your Arbiter even stronger, right? We can pair that with a Celestial Strife as well as Ascension on our gloves. Now, obviously, those are not going to be in the push variant where we have Ring of Starless Skies and Fist of Fate, but earlier in the mid game, you can run those two aspects. So this build is at its best when it's clearing content very quickly. It feels very fluid, feels very good to play in combat, and it's going to reward players who are comfortable constantly moving. So its biggest weakness is going to be when you're pushing harder content, where its reliance on barrier and relatively weak life regeneration can make mistakes a bit punishing. So how does the build work? So this is going to be built around keeping your character in motion while allowing Blessed Hammer to do the majority of the work. And a lot of this is going to come from Disciple's Halo. So this is going to change the behavior of Blessed Hammer so that the hammers follow you. So this means you don't have to worry about positioning yourself perfectly before casting. You can simply move through a group of enemies and let the hammers remain on top of them. Now, Argent Veil takes this concept even further by automatically casting Blessed Hammer when you evade. Now we're looking at the mythic variant of Argent Veil. Of course, you can see here that you can get Argent Veil just as it's always been through the Ancestral Unique. So this is not a mythic item or anything, but it is a unique that you do want to upgrade to mythic when you can. So Argent Veil is going to take this concept even further by automatically casting Blessed Hammer when you evade. So once the build is fully assembled, evade is no longer just a movement ability, it becomes a part of your offensive rotation, basically giving you another way to generate hammers while rapidly traveling through a dungeon. And then we have our Arbiter of Justice. This is going to kind of tie everything together. So while transformed, your evade becomes a very strong movement tool, and the build takes advantage of the associated buffs and mechanics to increase both damage and speed. So with enough CDR and Arbiter duration, the transformation can be maintained for very, very long periods of time. So the end result of all of this is a character that rarely needs to stand still. You can just kind of dash through enemies, spam evade, and just continuously generate Blessed Hammers around yourself. So let's talk a little bit about your rotation. So the most important thing to understand about Blessed Hammer Paladin is that movement is a part of your damage rotation. So you do not want to play like a stationary caster. Your character should constantly be moving through packs while the hammers follow you. So your first priority is obviously going to be use Arbiter of Justice. So if you find that the transformation is falling off too frequently, you need more CDR or Arbiter duration. So you can kind of temper, you can kind of work around that. We kind of talked about the Ancestral Charm that can help this, but overall, this is something that you're going to want to maintain. So while fighting, you want to hold down Blessed Hammer, right? You want to continuously produce damage with it, and at the same time, use Evade repeatedly while moving through enemies. Now, one thing to note is that your Argent Veil will automatically trigger additional Blessed Hammers, meaning your movement is at the same time producing damage. So once you've kind of assembled the complete setup, the basic gameplay becomes very simple. Hold Blessed Hammer, spam evade, keep moving. Now I have a bunch of other abilities here that we haven't really talked about yet. So we have Fanaticism Aura. So this should be used on cooldown to help apply Vulnerable. And that's going to work in parallel with the Exploit Glyph, basically dealing more damage to vulnerable enemies. We also have Aegis, which should be used as often as you can as a defensive prop to maintain a 100% block chance. So this is a very, very important defensive layer for the build. This will also give resolve through the different modifiers that we have, and it also grants armor as well. We also have Defiance Aura. This is primarily a response to crowd control. So when you become stunned, you can use it to grant Unstoppable and break that effect. This is also going to give us 70% armor and 70% bonus on all resistances, which is very, very strong. We also take a bunch of passive healing modifiers. And then finally, we have Falling Star. So Falling Star is both a mobility tool and part of the Ascension setup. So you want to use it frequently to kind of move across gaps, maintain your momentum through dungeons. You can see on the modifier that killing a vulnerable enemy reduces the cooldown of Falling Star. So again, just works very well with us applying vulnerable. In the push variant, we can actually replace this with Consecration, right? When you don't need that additional mobility and you're looking for a little bit more damage to push into the higher pits. This can give you both a blend of damage as well as a life per second. And a quick break from the guide for a second. If you're finding this guide helpful, be sure to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel and lets YouTube know that you're enjoying the content, which helps us reach more people. And if you'd like to go a step further and directly support the channel, you can also support us on Patreon. Every bit of support helps us continue making guides and making content for the community. You'll find the Patreon link below. All right, enough of the shameless plug. Let's get back to the guide. So we'll take a look at the mid-game setup. So you'll be running Godslayer Crown. So this is going to allow us to basically group enemies with a pull-in effect, which basically allows our blessed hammers to hit more targets. You can also run layered wards as well. So your block damage reduction is increased by 40%, which automatically brings us up to 75% with our Aegis. We also have Runic Gloves of Ascension. So casting a skill that grants our Arbiter form increases your damage, stacking up to 10 times. All stacks are lost when leaving Arbiter, so that's why it's so important to stay in Arbiter form. You see we have a temper here for Arbiter duration. That's something that you want to really focus on early. It's trying to maintain that form for as long as you can. On our legs here, you no longer dodge, but you gain a block damage reduction and a block chance. This gets us up to 90% block chance whenever our Aegis is up. Our boots, we're running Arbiter's Zephyr, so Arbiter's evade cooldowns reduced by 3 seconds. We're running Herald's Morningstar, a very important unique for us, so Blessed Hammer deals 100% increased damage, and there's up to a 20% chance to spawn an additional Blessed Hammer on the target hit. Redirected Force, this will give us damage equal to our block chance. This can double whenever we actually block an ability. We have Celestial Strife that we talked about earlier. This is going to give us increased vulnerable damage while we are within our Arbiter form. Argent Veil, of course, which is going to allow us to trigger our Blessed Hammers through our evade. And then Aspect of Holy Punishment, which is going to give us even more block chance, putting us over 100% block chance. With everything here, you should be at, you are capped at 100% block chance, but we have an additional 10% of wiggle room at 110% block chance. And once we go into the in-game and push variant, you can see that our helmet will change to Crown of Lucian. We'll be taking Fist of Fate and Ring of Starless Skies for more primary resource reduction. Fist of Fate just mainly for the raw damage from it, and then Crown of Lucian. This is going to kind of offset with the Ring of Starless Skies, but this is going to give us increasingly more skill damage at the cost of a stacking effect that's going to make the skill cost more resources. So you really want the crown here with the Ring of Starless Skies to kind of offset that cost. For our runes, we're running Igni and Agar. We're going to gain Offering by casting non-basic skills, and then our Gar will give us critical strike chance stacking up to 10%. And then Sim and K, so whenever we cast Evade, we'll get 75 Offering, great for this build. And then K, invoke the Druid's Earth and Bulwark skill, granting yourself a barrier. You will notice on the mid-game variant, we are running a couple different runes here. So cast 5 skills, become exhausted, and then summon a Spirit Wolf Companion. And then Pock and Gar here, spend 5% of your maximum resource, and then gain 2% critical strike chance for 5 seconds up to 10. We've kind of talked about our Talisman a little bit already, so we'll be running Baru of Light's Epiphany here for the 2 set mainly, but obviously the 3 and the 5 set are extremely strong as well for the damage that we get from it. For our Hordric Seal, we'll be running Mage's Anvil, so crit strike chance and then vulnerable damage. And then for our Ancestral Unique Charm, Griswold Opus. And this is one of the main reasons that we run so much crit strike chances due to this. So dealing direct damage grants increased crit strike damage for each enemy hit up to 50%. So crit strikes do multiple things with us. They deal a ton of damage. And at the bottom here with the lucky hit, they have a chance to heal us as well. For our Oath, we'll be taking Disciple. So casting a Disciple skill with a cooldown grants Arbiter for 4.5 seconds. Along with Wing Strikes gains the Disciple skill benefits. And while in Arbiter form, our Disciple skills deal 80% increased damage, which is really strong. right? Because our Blessed Hammer is a disciple skill. So through that, we have Blessed Hammer, Arbiter of Justice, and Falling Star. These are going to be all disciple skills, and it's one of the reasons that we run Falling Star, is because it will be able to proc this disciple oath. So for your stat priorities, there's a lot of different things that we can kind of talk about here. But I just want to talk about really the core stats that you're after. So the first one here is going to be cooldown reduction. And cooldowns are going to be valuable, right? Because Arbiter is central to the build. So if your cooldowns aren't keeping pace with your Arbiter duration, the transformation will repeatedly fall off and the build will not feel very fluid. So you want to aim for at least 50% CDR. Up next is going to be Arbiter duration. Obviously, you can temper that. We saw when we're looking through some of the equipment that Arbiter duration is something that you can kind of play with, temper it in if you think that your form is kind of falling off. The next one is going to be critical strike chance. So critical strike chance and vulnerable are going to be like your various damage multipliers that are going to provide the scaling needed for the higher content. Vulnerable effects are going to be more important, probably because the interaction between fanaticism R and exploit. Or I don't want to say vulnerable is more important than critical strike. I would say it's equally as important as critical strike damage. So if you get an item with a vulnerable roll on it, it is still very, very strong for this build. Defensively, a block chance is going to be one of your most important stats. Obviously, the goal is to reach 100% block chance. If you follow the mid-game setup, it'll get you to 110% block chance, obviously capped at 100%, but there's a little bit of wiggle room in there. And then obviously, movement speed is going to be very, very important for this build. So you can take a look at our boots here, 30% movement speed with a temper on movement speed. Okay, then taking a very quick look at our Paragon board. So we're going to be going for Spirit as your first glyph socket. It's one of the reasons that critical strike is so important on this build, because it synergizes with this glyph. On your second board, you're going to be going for Beacon. This is going to allow us to do more damage while we have an ally or a mercenary inside of our R. So very, very important to get your mercenary in this build. And the glyph socket with that will be Canny, just a stacking effective damage out of this. Your third board will be directly above this, Shield Bearer and Apostle. So Apostle here, basically going to increase the vulnerable damage to targets, and then Shield Bearer increase the damage equal to 110% of your block chance. Another reason that you want to hit 100% block chance is due to this node here. Just going to give you a ton of scaling damage from this. Your fourth board will be over here on the right-hand side, so Relentless and Exploit. So the Exploit glyph. Exploit is going to allow us to apply vulnerable, as well increase the damage to vulnerable targets. Relentless is going to be while moving for 2 seconds after you deal 8% increased damage and have 30% CDR. So this is something that you can kind of lean on a little bit more for that CDR reduction. And there's another reason you want to constantly be moving, is so that you can always proc this over and over. So even in a boss fight, right, you're fighting the boss, you make sure you're not doing that, and instead like running circles or just kind of running back and forth to proc this. And then your final board will be Castle and Arbiter. So Castle, you deal increased damage equal to 125% of damage reduction granted from armor. And then we're also running Arbiter. So it's a stacking effect that allows you to do more and more damage for each second that you've been in Arbiter. Another reason that you want to stay in that form for so long is so you don't lose this damage effect. Okay, so for your mercenaries, your hired is going to be Rahir, and your reinforcement will be Alkin, which is going to give us Field of Languish, going to reduce damage dealt by enemies. And Rahir is going to give us Ground Slam. This is going to slow targets, which is going to be very important for incapacitating targets, which again is very, very important if you're running this God Slayer crown here. Rahir's Aegis is really strong too, going to give us 50% resist to all elements. We're running Bastion. This is going to give us Unstoppable and give us a large effective damage reduction. And then the Ground Slam with Inspiration, right? We're talking about Ground Slam up here at the top. This is going to make enemies take 15% increased damage while within that Ground Slam, and essentially just a damage amp. Alrighty guys, that's going to be the end of this video. The link to the build will be in the description, so you guys can check that out. If you guys enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. See you guys in the next one.